Chasing Leviathan is a podcast about pursuing truth, one big question at a time through the discipline of listening. Truth is too big to tame, but if we pay close attention, we might get the chance to glimpse something truly magnificent. So please join me in this pursuit, 1 week at a time. Hello and welcome to Chasing Leviathan. I'm your host, PJ Wehry, and I'm here today with Dr. Anat Matar. We are talking about her book, The Poverty of Ethics, and she is the senior lecturer at the Department of Philosophy at Tel Aviv University. Dr. Matar, wonderful to have you today.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
So just to get us started, why this book? And I mean, even as we were talking earlier, like there's so much here, and it is a timely book even again. But for our audience, why The Poverty of Ethics?
Okay. Well, actually, the book originates from two sources. One is purely philosophical. The other is my activist part, it takes a lot of my time, and somehow the merge of these two resulted in this book. And I think the activist part influenced the academic part in the way that I became annoyed more and more throughout the years by the ethical discourse, by and large. I mean, by people who address themselves to morality, they, take the moral high ground, they are talking about evil and good and good persons and good deeds and whatever, but they're not active in any way. And I live in Israel. I mean, this is not the place not to be active. I mean, I don't know whether there is any such place, but Israel is certainly not one. I mean, as we are talking, Israel is bombarding Gaza. Palestinian children were killed in the last week. I think 6 or 7 of them, really young children, and this is all our country is doing. And I don't think you can, on the one hand, talk, very nicely and politely and with assurance about ethical measures, ethical principles, whatever, and then not being involved in anything. And moreover, those people are, when you approach them with this complaint, they become aggressive. They blame you for being, the non-ethical, not enough ethical, or being biased, or being too political, or being loyal to a party, which I'm not. I mean, I vote for the Communist Party, which is a Palestinian party mainly in Israel, but this is not my ethical political stance by and large. This does not influence me. I don't abide by any rule book of the party. So it's really, this annoyance, which is, as you can hear, is both political but also really philosophical and academic. That's the long answer to the question, why this book?
And I see, you're kind of drawing from Wittgenstein. How has Wittgenstein's influence and even your response and critique to him informed this book?
Yeah, I'm very happy about this question, because Wittgenstein is exactly the kind of figure that ethical philosophers lean on, and I understand why. I think they're rightly so, in a way. I deal in the book very extensively with the philosophy of Cora Diamond, who is a brilliant philosopher. She writes wonderfully, and I think she reads Wittgenstein very carefully and nicely, and maybe more faithfully than I do. So maybe he was, an ethical, quote unquote, person, but I think I can get a lot more for Wittgenstein than this liberal ethics that she does and other Wittgensteinian philosophers do. I mean, they're so happy with the goodness in a way, which somehow results miraculously in, the most shallow liberal attitude. It's such a deep philosophy ends up in, just being a good person and attending to one another and being sensitive. And yes, I mean, there are very, very nice results as well, like not following principles very harshly, which I concur with, not being obsessed with analytical definitions of the good, of the ethical, of the political, and just deriving your what you ought to do from a generalized principle. That is very Wittgensteinian. I mean, the resistance to this, and that is nice. I go along with this, but I think at the end, when you follow this route too closely, and maybe as Wittgenstein maybe did, then, as I said, you end up not being political enough, and I think not being ethical enough, because I think ethics derives from politics or leftist politics, and rather than vice versa. So, but then why Wittgenstein at all? And I think that Wittgenstein, along with others, I mention in the book mainly two. There are others, but mainly two. One of them is Voloshinov, who was a Marxist philosopher, a Soviet philosopher, and he wrote a book about Marxist philosophy of language. And I think he managed to show in a very beautiful way, very exact, very precise way, how language is imbued with ideology, and that when we are required to address ourselves to be sensitive to the principles, the linguistic principles, the way the operations of language, we need to attend to the ideology that is conveyed implicitly. And I think he showed that very nicely. And Wittgenstein doesn't say a word about that. And the third one is Jacques Derrida. And I think Derrida was, of course, aware. I mean, politics was his bread and butter. And he did, unlike me, he wasn't vegan, so I suppose and he was French, so I suppose butter was part of his menu. But yeah. What I mean is, he shows this Voloshinovian principle in another manner, and that is in the way that language can be attacked. Is not always neatly ideological, but also is full of contradictions, and that is wonderful. And the role of Wittgenstein in this triad is by showing how, I think, best, by showing how we live in language, how we act in language, how we cannot separate linguistic principles and linguistic understanding from our way of being, from our experiences, from the way we are educated, the books we read, our community. So I think he showed it best. I don't know any philosopher who did that better. So.
Absolutely. I still find Wittgenstein's account of language to be one of the best, if not the best, that I've read. Something that you mentioned, and this is just to make sure that I'm on the same track with you. It's almost what it sounds like you're saying is Wittgenstein talked a lot and really clearly demonstrated a lot about language, especially in to think about his metaphor of the game, right? Like language games. But what he didn't do is ask who's running the game.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Like when we talk about that missing the ideological component, and how that ideological spread happens.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's one exception to this. It is when he talks about mature persons bringing into language children, about teachers and he has those many metaphors of the teacher and the schoolboy or schoolgirl. He doesn't think of schoolgirl, but we do. So
as we should.
There are those metaphors exactly in the way in those places that you refer to. In language games, in the question of rule following, and how we bring people into our language, into our game, and how we initiate the young. And I think he's very sensitive to this. I think he describes that wonderfully. But again, without thinking of the notion of power that comes along with that.
Yes, that reminds me of he has lectures and conversations about aesthetics, and he talks about how the beautiful is derived from the good, and the good is derived, and we just don't think about the pedagogy of this. Literally, we give a child some food and we want them to eat it, and we go, good.
Yeah.
And from there, we then distinguish beauty. And that's how it's taught. It really is. We don't think about how basic it is, how it starts from these very simple experiences. But what he doesn't do is he is like, when we start giving these to children at this impressionable age, we are progressing. We are progressing so into clear systems of power and these clear ideological systems. And this is where I think, I want to ask kind of a sideways.
Let me just interrupt in a second, because he came from an aristocratic family, of course, and he was aware of that. And he wasn't happy about that. But he was, I don't think he really managed to separate himself as much as he would want, perhaps, from the education that he got, which comes to show, exactly his own principle. You can't really overcome the education as much as you want to. And so he was sensitive to that, but I don't think sensitive enough to the aristocratic attitude that he himself had.
Before we go too far, I do want to address your motivation for writing this book, and one, how much it resonates with me. I hope it resonates with me. There is a real frustration. I don't mind moralizing that has a conclusion in mind already. I do believe in moral intuitions, right? Like that we're like, okay, I talked to Dr. Francis Beckwith about this. He's like, it's okay to have an argument for like torturing children is wrong, right? Like, however we need to defend that, right? That's a good moral intuition. But what's very frustrating, and I think this is, again, trying to make sure I'm tracking with you, but I so often see ethics as, instead of justifying real moral intuitions, justifying ease, justifying comfort. When you talk about this kind of like shallow liberal ethic, it's astonishing, I'll put that in air quotes, some sarcasm there, how comfortable people's ethics can make them, right? It's like all of a sudden it's like, wow, it's astonishing how like you came to this conclusion that let you live your life the way you wanted to. And there's this focus on ease, and a lot of times we're not willing to make hard decisions. And so we find ways to justify not making sacrificial decisions on our own part.
Yeah, I'm not that happy with the sacrificial part. I don't think sacrifice is. I don't think. I'm serious, actually, because I don't think this should be the measure. I'm very much for happy politics and joyful actions as much as we can, and so it's not. I don't think a question of sacrifice, but I do think that being too easy with oneself and one society especially. And again, I'm speaking as a privileged Israeli Jewish citizen here in the days, in a week, that Palestinian children weren't tortured. Some of them were. Some of them are still wounded, but some dead. 5-year-old, 7-year-old just died a couple of days ago. And I see the Israeli society, and it's coming from all classes, and it covers the whole of almost all of the Jewish population in Israel. They justify this, and so they would accept, I'm sure, the general principle of not torturing or not killing children. Of course they're against, and they would say, when you open a discussion with them exactly about this, they'd say, of course we're against killing children, but we had no choice, but they're the children of our enemy, and what can we do? I mean, we had to kill this enemy, and they share their lives with him, and they live in the same apartment, and that there was no choice. So, I mean, it's so easy, I think, to find justification derived from, very, very mild or consensual principles, and then something that we all agree to, that you can defend yourself, that killing innocent persons is wrong, but you can, if there's no choice, and if you have to defend yourself, then you may kill. There is all this theory that is gradually built and leads eventually to the killing of those children. And this is something I resist wholeheartedly. I mean, it's not, and this is tied to what we were just talking about Wittgenstein, actually. And what we get from Wittgenstein is a refusal to go this way, in justifying through principles and theories, and going to the abstract rather than seeing what we have in front of us. But the question is then, how do we see? And Wittgenstein talks about and teaches us how to be sensitive. But he doesn't, as I said, he himself is not sensitive enough to the political or ideological part that sensitivity plays in our life. So without being politically sensitive, you really cannot be sensitive at all. This is what my book is about, actually.
Yes. And kind of a sideways question here, but I think it will dovetail nicely with what you just said. Why did you write this book in Hebrew?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it's a difficult question. I hesitated myself, but I was thinking more when I wrote it. I was thinking more about my political community than my academic community. And I was writing it for them in a way, and actually they do read it. My first readers, when the book came out, in Hebrew, were my fellow demonstrators and people from Anarchists Against the Wall, and all these groups that I'm involved with. So it paid. I mean, they were really the first ones to comment. But it was also a gesture against academic literature, against academic writing. And I found that it would be easier for me to detach myself from academic writing in Hebrew rather than in English. Maybe because English is not my first language, or maybe because English is my academic language. I mean, when do I write in English? I mean, I write in Hebrew in all sorts of contexts. I write in English mainly in academic contexts. And I wanted to detach myself. I didn't want this text to be another philosophy book or another academic book.
And so the tie-in that I'm hoping for there is that you were talking about for you, this is primarily about politics goes all the way down, and that that all of our actions are grounded in our community, first. And I loved your introduction about I'm gonna butcher this. Writing in the theater. I can't remember the name of the place. Forgive me.
In Jaffa. Yeah.
Jaffa. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was trying to find it here. I should have written it down. But and you're explaining about this. Can you kind of sketch for our audience the way that you view the political sphere? Like, what do you consider politics?
Yeah, that's the hardest question, actually, apart from the question, what is left, which is even harder. But of course, they're interconnected, of course. But yeah, I think of the political in our context vis-a-vis the moral or the ethical. So I'll just say a word about the moral or the ethical, and then I think the political will be understood better. And it also continues what we just talked about, because when I think about moral or ethical discourses, they have to do with either generalized principles, and what follows or supposed to be following from them, or ethical sensitivities and being a good person or being evil. And all this is very, very abstract. And the political, for me, is first of all not abstract. It's first of all concrete. It's an understanding that goes, as you said, all the way down, but materially. So I'm actually thinking as a Marxist on politics. I think that the fact that philosophy and moral discourses and ethical justifications do their best to avoid the economic discourse, for example, or any empirical discourse, actually, historical discourses, tiny data, all the rich information that they want to bracket. I think the political brings it back. I mean, you cannot talk about, this is the example I discuss, as you surely know, very, very at length in the book, is the abolition. And all the discourse about slavery, when it comes to philosophers, it becomes a question of principles. What were the principles of convincing, of persuading for and against, all that, and not about the revolt. I mean, everyone forgets about, the revolt of the slaves themselves. And I think it is not a coincidence, because those philosophers who are, first of all, interested in the ethical justification of the abolition, they're thinking about themselves. I think they're thinking about white persons, privileged white person, maybe the intelligentsia, or, and how we should react to the reality of slavery. What position should we do? But they never think of themselves as the slaves themselves. I mean, or as black persons, or, as the oppressed person, or as Palestinians in my context. So it's just a question of us, and this us is very privileged, very white, and oops, sorry for that. And so the political for me is bringing that awareness back. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, yes, that answers it in part. I'd love to see, if you don't mind, can you talk a little bit more about how politics and community, do you see those terms as equivalent, or what is the connection between what you think of as communal activities or the community itself and politics?
Okay. Let's start with community. I think this is where I go along with the Wittgensteinians and Wittgenstein himself. As we said, I think we cannot be individualized. We cannot abolish society as Margaret Thatcher did. I mean, there's no such thing as society, famously she said. And no, there is such thing as society, and we are part of it, and we are born in our community, in our family, in a class, in a gender, and what we are is all that. It reflects all that, reflects our community. This is where we get our notions, our values, our value judgment in aesthetics, in ethics, and everything else. The way we behave, the way we are enraged, what limits are to our rage, for example. So this is all part of community life, and that's very important. We cannot think. I don't think we should abstract from that, and anyway, we couldn't. I mean, if we want to abstract from that, this must be a mistake eventually. It's something about understanding, it's about persuasion, it's about concepts formation. I mean, so it's about philosophy of language, if you wish. So that's the role of community for me. It's in a way more abstract. When I think politically about that, I mean, this is already political, of course, but when I want to connect it to the political, the part of the political we were just discussing, I'm thinking even about enlarging this notion of community. I'm thinking about the international community. I'm thinking about not being, just being happy with your own family and friends and small community, but understanding that we on this world, on Earth, actually, are part of a large community, and that we have to think about all of us together, and that includes animals, as I hinted before. I mean, everyone, everything that is living on our planet. And I'm not referring at the moment only to the climate crisis, but of course I am referring to this as well. So that's the political for me, that and its relation with the community. It is part of our understanding of what community is, but it also shattering the boundaries of the community in order to enlarge it more and more. Otherwise, it's not a leftist politics. I mean, the leftist politics just pushes you outside the boundaries of your community. We were just listening to the news just before we started our conversation, and you're in the States. I'm not. I have my own problems here, but about the problem of immigration now. I mean, in the southern border with Mexico, that was just on the news before I joined this conversation, and I think it's very clear how we should not limit ourselves to the American community, or American in this sense, the United Statesian community, and think about all those people carrying their babies and children in the water, those horrible picture that we just saw.
Yeah, that we're humans first.
Yeah, well, animals and humans first. Yes, yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, and something that I'm picking up from the way you're talking about this is that you talk about your frustration with bracketing, with abstracting, and some of that obviously, as you talk about your own activism, it's the way that they break off from application and from the calls to action. But it also seems that there's an epistemological part to this, that you talk about bracketing off from rich data. And so it really seems to violate, it creates these inconsistencies that, Derrida would rip apart in deconstruction in their language, because they are avoiding certain pockets of inconvenient information.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm good. I'm tracking with you.
Well, yeah. Would you like me to give an example? An example
yeah,
I discussed in the book. So I'm writing a little bit about Martha Nussbaum, who is a cherished philosopher, American philosopher, and she's involved politically. She's very involved, but her involvement does exactly the kind of bracketing. This is why I was reminded of this now. Exactly the kind of bracketing that you just mentioned. She has her heroes, as I do too, of course. But she has her heroes like Nelson Mandela, the regular liberal heroes. So Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, the trio, but she's
the liberal Holy Trinity. Yeah.
What?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry?
The liberal Holy Trinity.
Yeah, exactly. The Holy Trinity. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So, but when she discusses them, and she does that at length, she somehow forgets. I mean, she turns a blind eye to interesting data about information about those people. For example, the attachment, the especially Martin Luther King and Mandela, of course, to the Communist Party. And all their economical attitudes. I mean, these are not only liberation fighters, and it's not only civil rights or even human rights. It goes much deeper in both persons. I should leave Gandhi aside because it's a more complicated example at the moment. But these two, and for Mandela, I can say, because it's later, for Mandela, I know for a fact that his support for the Palestinians was, was unlimited. And actually he wrote that unless the Palestinians will be free, we will never be free. About, black persons in South Africa. And actually he meant everyone else. We too, will never be free. And this I call bracketing. I mean, it's so important. It's an essential feature. It's not, his hate or whatever, how many children he has. It's not that kind of information. It's very relevant to his thought, but it's a bit inconvenient, and let's forget about it. And I think this is a very, very liberal move, known liberal move, that bracketing those parts that are not convenient. And in many occasions, not in her case, I must say to her, she's good at that. But in many cases, it has to do with cherishing nonviolence. And, well, we're against killing children, okay? And we're against violence. But I think we should think about nonviolence seriously. And this principle of cherishing nonviolence and bringing again and again the Holy Trinity as examples of nonviolent struggles, it's not helpful and it's not right. And as I said, she acknowledges, of course, Mandela's turn to violence when he had no choice, when he discovered that he had no choice. But many people forget that. Now, when we see sculptures everywhere, when we see faces depicted everywhere, it's not the violent path that he had to take, because non-violence didn't pay. And this is, again, something that is usually bracketed. It's not convenient.
It's not comfortable, right? We take what's radical and we make it comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
And violence is never comfortable.
Yeah. And it's not comfortable to me as well. It's not something we should gladly adopt. I really don't think, let's go and just kill everyone. This is not the right way to go. But I also think that, just speaking very nicely and complacently about nonviolence is not helpful.
Right. And to take, and I probably shouldn't wade into these waters. Like you said, it's more complex, but Gandhi's path towards nonviolence involved some very extreme measures on his part, like hunger, fasting. Yeah. Like, this is not easy, not comfortable. But it's easy
usually
when
it's usually the people who support those strikers that I'm complaining against, rather than the people involved in it themselves.
Right. Which I could see why, that would turn towards the academic community in many respects. This is a critique of that. You mentioned kind of with Mandela that when he says we will not be free, he's speaking that kind of universal human sense, right? And you've already referenced that. At the beginning of your book, you talked about that move from Hebrew to English as a universalizing move, and you felt that was the time. What have you seen? How has the reception changed? And the act of translation is an act of sublation. What have you learned from the move into English in context and language, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm very happy about this question as well, because I was surprised that I found I found friends, I found friends much, in a much wider neighborhood than I expected. I did expect people to like this book, people whom I knew and whose philosophy I knew. I mean, close philosophers, and of course several activists who were up my alley. But it came, it reached a much wider audience and readership, and that I'm surprised by. Just a couple of weeks ago, a mathematician from Paris wrote to me that he stumbled upon my book and how wonderful it is, and he just quoting it from it. And so yes, he's politically active on the left, but he's a mathematician. He's interested in philosophy, but he's not a professional philosopher. And so it's in a way of shattering the boundaries. As I said before, I mean, the community is much larger even in this respect. And for me as a leftist, this is very good news. This is very good news. And another thing that I was happy to find out is that it goes both to the younger generation and the older one. I mean, people react to this book favorably from all ages. It's not my age. I'm 67 now, so you could say, those 60s people, hippies, or that would be the kind of audience, philosophical and activist audience. No, it's even millennials and really young persons. I do actually by Hebrew readers at the moment, but maybe this will change. But young Hebrew readers, I mean, of 16, 17-year-old, I mean, in high school, and they read the book and they say, wow, this changed the way we see things. And then they refuse to go to the army, which is another bonus that I get.
One thing I did want to touch on, being conscious of your time, is you talk a good amount about religion and the divine, and kind of how the sacred plays throughout this. What role do you see the sacred in this whole discussion for you?
Well, I'm writing about this idiom, the death of God. And what I think is, since Nietzsche killed God for us, and actually what he said is, or implied, is that Kant killed God, and it just took us the whole of the 19th century to realize that. But so let's move between Kant and Nietzsche. So God is dead. But my feeling is that although he's dead, and I think Nietzsche phrased that best, we didn't really get the meaning of this. And Nietzsche talks about the light of the stars, that it takes so many years to reach us, and we didn't really get or grasp the idea of being in a godless world. And so the sacred and the transcendental, like transcendental good or transcendental evil, or something that is magnified in a way and goes beyond everything that we can think of. I think it's natural. I know it's mesmerizing. But I think we should be aware when we think about it. I think we should be aware and not just reduce it. I mean, just not saying, okay, this is a godless world, let's just be economical. Or let's just be, materialist in the wrong way. I am a materialist. As I said, I'm Marxist, so I must be a materialist, but not a materialist in the way that you see no spirit. I mean, you see. So the sacred for me, or God for me, is just a warning about how to include it in a way that will also serve me politically, or not in an instrumental way. It sounds horrible now that I'm saying it. It's just recruit God. So it's not I'm drafting God, but it's just understanding we are in a godless world, but beware of taking it in the wrong direction, in a very harsh direction, where we just face brute facts with no sensitivities to each other. And so people who do this, who go along this way, are ethical. But we just said that, I'm comfortable with those ethical persons as well. So I want another step. I mean, without God, but without ethics as something pure and as something that replaces God, but with something that is much richer, much more complicated, I would think. Much more conscious, simply.
I want to make, I should have mentioned it before, that I myself am a devout Christian, and that's just so that there's no sense of, so that this conversation is genuine, right? So that I'm not like sitting here like, and as you talk about this, I do find, even talking to materialists, and I want to see if maybe we can bring back some of the themes you've been talking about, is there's a materialism that brackets off rich data in pursuit of being purely materialist. Is that a way to talk about what you think of as the...
I think this is a very nice connection. So first of all, a biographical comment. My supervisor, and actually the topic of my thesis, my doctoral thesis, was Michael Dummett. He was a devout Catholic, and we were very, very close friends. And I mean, he wasn't only a mentor, but he was, a mentor in the full sense of the word, and also a friend. And his daughter is now a very good friend after he passed. So, and he understood completely, and she understands completely. I mean, though, we're coming from very different backgrounds, but I think it doesn't matter whether you define yourself as a Marxist, a materialist, or a Catholic, but this political sense that is common to us is really important. So I'm here. I think I would myself bracket actually the too laden concept of being religious or not, being Christian, being Jewish, being a believer or not, on the one hand, but refusing just the very shallow being ethical. I'm a person. I'm just sensitive to everyone. So that is something I also don't want. And I think there's a very, very strong common ground here. And the common ground is the common ground of activism. It's political activism before everything else. Michael Dummett was an activist. He was spent years on political activism against racism, for immigration, for example, in England. He was a very pro-immigration activist. He and his wife was also Catholic, and our friendship was based about this joint understanding through activism, through political activism, and then shared views based on that. So I think, I don't know whether it answers your question, but it aims to, because because I think, it's not the holy or the ceremonies that we do. They get their own content by what we really do. And what we really do is what we really do politically. So when he was a Christian, or she was a Christian, his wife, Michael and Ann Dummett, and when I'm not, religious in any way, but what we do takes its content and its significance from our joint political action. This is what matters, actually. And I don't think, I take it seriously. I don't think this is a materialist in the shallow way of seeing materialism. I do think there's something sacred about that, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
something very, it's important. It's important to me. And I don't think materialists can speak about importance in the same way. Maybe this is the word I was looking. It's significant. It's important.
How do we avoid this kind of bracketing off of rich data? Do you see that primarily as an intellectual exercise? Obviously, you see activism playing that role. Are there certain rituals and practices that enrich us to be to enrich our souls, maybe, so that we have this significance that avoids this bracketing? Are there
I think it
what would
takes
you
time.
recommend for
And
that?
time is something that we lack. It takes time because it needs reading, it needs listening, like to your podcasts. I mean, it requires time, and this is not something I can ask from anyone. I mean, most people don't have time, so this is a sort of privilege of the privileged. I mean, of academics, of people who do have more leisure. And this is why I think we understand, or we can explain differences in political attitude regarding classes, difference in classes. There are classes who cannot afford paying so much attention and taking so much time about being updated. So they get the information from, very, very quick click bites, it just they read scatteringly and that's bad, but that we understand it. I mean, this is the reality. But if we want to overcome that, I think we should. I mean, education plays a large part here, and as you said, I mean, political activism on just causes. But political activism is not, again, I don't want it to sound, now it's alarming a little bit, I don't want it to sound like a general principle itself. Political activism can have so many manifestations. It's like unionizing. I mean, you just when you just belong to a union, this is political activism enough. I mean, you understand something that is, you have interest in, it pays you. I mean, it pays you in both ways. And I'm very much for it. I don't think that, self-interest is something wrong. I think it's very good and important. People do act and should act first of all, from their own interest, and then, only then, rather than principles, and only then understand the principles that, they can rely on or generalize. So unionizing is one thing. Being involved in your children's class, or or helping immigrants, as I said, or something like that. It may be tiny activities, but being involved in such things opens your world in a way that enriches you. And then I think once it's starting, then reading comes along, and watching the right movies comes along, and listening to podcasts while you're cooking comes along, and all that.
And this is a clarification question. When you've mentioned a couple different things, like as these kind of little ways of political activism. And I'm trying to understand how the moral and political interact, and whether, when we talk about what does it mean for politics to be all the way down. When you are going down the side of the road and you see someone broken down, of course, this doesn't matter as much anymore with cell phones, but there was a time where, like this was a big deal. Or you see someone, trying to, let's say they're carrying something heavy, and they're trying to get a door open, and they're a stranger, and you open the door for them. Do you see that as a moral thing, or do you see that, or political? How does is that thing political when you are doing that for that person?
Okay, I think this is a tricky question. because it reduces the moral to those trivial incidents that, everyone can do this. And even fascists open the door for, I'm not kidding, actually. I mean, even fascists would help an elderly person to cross the road, or help them carrying something that is very heavy. And so we're human, and we're human also as fascists, or as, as murderers, or as pilots bombing Gaza. I mean, they some of them are probably my neighbors, and they're very nice, and they help me, collect the garbage or whatever. So this is why it's a wrong question in a way, and this is partly a reason I find the moral discourse or the ethical discourse going along the wrong way, simply because it's so inviting to think about these examples, but these are the wrong examples. I mean, you can't, because as I said, I mean, in the morning you can help this elderly woman, and in the evening you go and bomb Gaza, and I think there is a connection here. I think there is a connection. It's not that these are two different worlds. It's you're helping this elderly woman, which helps you think of yourself as a moral person, and then gives you the license to kill, or the license to be a fascist, or the license to bracket your own deeds and just focus on your very, very nice deeds in the morning. So this is why those things are, I don't think they're helpful. I think we should be aware of them. But this doesn't mean that we shouldn't help. And, those...
Okay. All right.
Do you see what I mean? I mean...
so those are moral actions, but they're...
Just a sec. Let me try...
Absolutely.
Saying this is entering the same room from another door.
Sure.
When at the end of the book, I'm writing about, okay, we've been through all this, and now let me just say it in another way. I say in the book, and I'm saying it now. It's not that the political surpasses the ethical. It's just when we think politically, the whole world, the whole distinction between the political and the moral should collapse. And when we see the moral through the political, the eyes of the political, we just understand things differently. And this is what I was trying to convey by giving this example about the morality of helping this elderly woman or something. So of course we need to help people. I mean, it's wrong not to help, but when you understand that after you're getting the wider and richer picture, that I think you see the place of this in the whole mechanism, in the whole theory.
Would a way to think about this be that sometimes people talk about almost like balancing things out or canceling things out, so that it's like, if I do 9 nice things, I can do the 10th, the 10th nasty thing, right?
Yeah,
or evil thing.
Yeah, exactly. So there is, I mean, we're human. I mean, we care about our self-image. We care about ourselves. Everyone cares about, even those who deny that. We care about our self-image. And morality and our being ethical has a large part in our self-image. Even if, again, we're cynical and we say, I don't care. I mean, I'm narcissistic. I'm egotistic. I mean, it's not true. I mean, even those people who declare that care about their self-image. So here comes the thing that you just mentioned. I mean, I'll do these and these things. I'm part of, I collect money for the poor or something like that. But then it's bracketed. It's not understanding the whole thing. It's not understanding the mechanism. It's not understanding what you really are doing.
Mm. Well, Dr. Matar, just absolute pleasure having you on today. If I could ask you before we finish up, what is one takeaway? And this is often the hardest question I ask, but what is one takeaway you would leave for our audience as they think about your episode this week?
Oh, it is the most difficult question, and I didn't expect
every time.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. What I think about context, think about political context. This is what about power relations. Don't delude yourself. It's so easy to delude, and I do it too. I mean, it's not, as I said, I mean, we're all human, and we all compliment ourselves and we congratulate ourselves for what we do. So, but just take one step back and just think from a leftist point of view. I think being leftist is what I'd like people to be.
That sounds like a whole different podcast about what does it mean to be leftist,
Yeah.
but we'll leave that for another time.
I think people understand.
Thank you.
I mean, by now.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very, very much. Bye-bye.